Welcome to another edition of We Need to Talk About Movies. Brought to you by banterflix.com. And now, here's your host, Jim McLean.
Begorra. Welcome to the Banterflix St. Patrick's Day special. And what's more St. Patrick's Eve to talk about than James Bond? Well, hear me out, listeners, because we're going to be talking about the Pierce Brosnan tenure as 007. We're going to go back to 1995 with GoldenEye, and yeah, we'll finish with Die Another Day. But, you know, we can talk about a lot of good stuff before Die Another Day. But joining me on this special edition of We Need to Talk About Movies is our very own deputy editor, Joe McElroy. Hello to you, Joe.
Good evening, Jim.
I expected a yes money penny, but
we're not doing a Connery pod.
we'll keep that for the Connery.
And I'm not
pod.
doing Brosnan.
No, we'll not go down there. We have Kate Cannon, who we've now discovered through the power of Zoom. You know, she might have left Belfast to Bristol and to, isn't it the Watershed you're at now, Kate?
Yeah.
But now, through the power of Zoom, we've left it a bit late. We've had almost a year of the lockdown, but we can get Kate back. So hello to you, Kate Cannon.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I think this is your second time on the podcast, Lee Hutchinson from Filibuster. I think because last time we had you on was Tenet, but I've known you for quite some time on the festival circuit, like the likes of London and Edinburgh Film Festival. So hello to you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It seems only fitting that there should be a Scotsman here on this kind of podcast discussion. Though, surprisingly, maybe to your listeners, I'm someone that I live a couple of miles away from where Sean Connery was born and bred. And I think when you probably listen to this voice, you think, that doesn't sound like a guy that kind of probably comes from the same city as the first James Bond. So, yeah, it could be a bit of a culture shock there.
Of course it is, Lee. That is the voice of someone who has audible honey. So do not put your accent down, young man. You know, it's just embrace it and go full Connery. Yes, Jim. That's, you know. But, you know, we're not really talking about Sean Connery, but, you know, bring it up. That by all means. You know, Joe, I know, not purposely for this podcast, but I know you did kind of go back and rewatch all the Bonds over, was it the first lockdown or a first, second, and third?
It was a first lockdown because I was going to watch them all in the hope that, you know, by the time I'd finished the run, No Time to Die would be out in cinemas, but that didn't really work out, did it?
No. I do believe we're going to know who the next Bond is before we actually get to see Daniel Craig's final out. I could be wrong, I don't know. But Lee, Kate, any of you kind of venture back into the world of 007 during any of the lockdowns to find some, you know, kind of escapism from all COVID nonsense?
I did just rewatch all of the Pierce Brosnan films over the past couple of days, so that was...
Yeah, but that's just because we asked you, Kate. That's why.
I mean, James Bond was one of the first franchises that I really fell in love with, but I don't think I've seen any of the films in my adult life. So this was coming back into it was quite fun and very different. Experienced it very differently than when I was, 10, 11. So very interesting.
Yeah, because that's actually an interesting thing. You've raised a question there about first franchises that we've fallen in love with, because I'd probably say Bond is probably up there. Maybe that and Lethal Weapon, just, two weird, kind of very different franchises. But I would definitely say kind of 007 is up there. What about you, Lee? Did you venture back into the world of 007, not just specifically for this podcast, but throughout any of the lockdowns?
No, I did my homework for Pierce Brosnan, but I've been kind of in a holding pattern. Like, I kind of, not long before sort of lockdown kicked in, I picked up, like, I've owned James Bond on VHS over the years, then DVD, and I own a beautiful Blu-ray box set of it. But I decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to get them really cheap on digital so I can just like watch them at the click of a button, and I'm going to rewatch them all kind of on my nice TV in 4K before sort of the film comes out. And then sort of early March gets pushed back. I'm like, you know what, I'll do my watch later in the year. it's going to come out in like October, November. I'll do it then. Gets pushed back again. So I'm kind of hoping sort of later this year I will rewatch them all in kind of one go and stuff like that. I haven't done that in probably quite a few years. Otherwise, I think I maybe watched a couple of the Dalton films, and yeah, I think I think I watched Skyfall probably in lockdown, but by and large I kind of kept my powder dry, just waiting for the moment to come.
See, I was going to say, Lee, that you just randomly turn on ITV2 at about 10 o'clock one evening and find either, look, if it's not Skyfall, it's going to be The Shawshank Redemption. One of those two films is going to be on at 10 o'clock on ITV2 at some point, and you're going to find yourself watching it. And talking of ITV, because I know like we are going to be talking about the Brosnan tenure, but I know I watched a lot of the Bonds, you know, I think it was just kind of pre-lockdown last year and kind of into lockdown whenever I think they started to replay a lot of, because I think they went back and replayed all the Daniel Craig Bonds close to the original release date, and then that got changed because of COVID. And then they kind of went, well, what we'll do is we'll go back and show the old ones. They started with the Connery, and then they went, they did some Roger Moore. They kind of jumped some of the ones that people don't maybe love as much. I don't think they got round to showing too many of the Dalton, well, either of the Dalton Bonds. But yeah, actually, for this pod, is probably the first time in a long time, I think I've went back and rewatched any of Brosnan's tenure as 007. And, you know, just as Kate said, that was my... I'll ask you all this at the very start. You know, was any of Pierce's films the first Bond film for you? I would imagine it is the case, unless someone's going to be a lot younger than us, and that has happened on this podcast before. But for any of you, this Brosnan, was that the first time seeing 007 on the big screen?
Yep. Yes. Well, I'd watched Bond flat out when I was younger on TV. It was mostly, you know, Connery and Moore. But unfortunately, my first venture to seeing Bond on the big screen was Die Another Day. And it wasn't really a memorable occasion. It was just a case of going, oh no. You know, like I was, you know, at the very least I was hoping it would be, you know, semi-good, but no. It kind of starts a bit well and then just goes downhill, but we'll probably be getting into that anyway.
Yeah, make me feel old. Joe, how old were you when you went to see that then? 2002?
2002. I would have been 12.
Yeah, it makes me feel
old.
Yeah,
there you are.
Kate and Lee, feel free to kind of now then try and throw in and make me feel old as well.
I'm going to probably make you feel a little bit younger, but like my experience with Pierce Brosnan films in the cinema was quite an emotional journey, really. I don't even remember the first Bond that I watched, but I would watch it on TV and I would grab the videos every kind of Christmas time in the UK. It would be like 2 for £10 or something like that. So I was always like building my collection year on year, and like License to Kill felt like the real standout, seeing that 15 rated certificate. I was desperate to see Tomorrow Never Dies in 97 when I would have been about 10. Sort of, this is well before the 12A certificate, and my parents would just not take me. It was just not happening. They just didn't view it as happening. And I remember just one day I was so determined that I was going to see that film. Like, I am not a religious person, but I actually went to my bathroom and I remember praying, like, please God, I really want to go see Tomorrow Never Dies in the cinema, which is a pathetic memory to have, but unfortunately never happened. But I got to go see The World Is Not Enough in 99, which was just amazing. Just I remember seeing it on a Saturday afternoon at the cinema. My dad was like bored of the film and left. And I actually went to see Die Another Day multiple times at the cinema. I was kind of just old enough to see to kind of go to the cinema myself by that age. And I was like, the idea of just seeing a new James Bond movie, I was going up, like, I think I went 3 or 4 times, like looking for all the references to the other films. I went on a date to see one of them. It was just like the opportunity to see James Bond on my own free will. Felt like I was overcompensating for my experience with Tomorrow Never Dies.
I have to ask, Lee, how did the date go?
I remember we held hands, so that was a nice little experience. And I think we had a really nice Pizza Hut lunch buffet afterwards. So I think like a 10 out of 10 early teens date.
Oh, that's a nice way to start this pod. Kate, what about you? Would Pierce, Big Old Pierce, would he have been your first Bond at cinema?
No, mine was Casino Royale. I think when I was 12.
Okay, so I do feel though this happens a lot in this pod. It's not quite to the level of when I was talking to someone about. Did you get to see? We were talking about Train Spotting. How old were you when Train Spotting was born? It's like I wasn't born. Like, oh, thanks. That's okay. So it's not that bad. So I would have definitely. I have a real strong memory of going to see Goldeneye in the cinema. 95, I'd have been 12, 13, not quite exactly where in the year it was released. Because I just remember it was that case of in school, everybody was talking about it. Everybody was talking about it. In that case, I loved Bond, and I would always associate Bond with Bank Holiday Mondays. It would always be on either probably ITV or UTV here, and they would have it on. And that's how I got into it. And that was my gateway drug into 007. And then when it was on, it's like, right, I've got to go see Bond. So I went to see it with my mum. And that has kind of weirdly become a tradition now. To date, we've seen all of the Bonds since then in the cinema together. We did like the Harry Potters together. We did Bond together. And every so often we kind of every year it's an ongoing joke I have to myself with regarding to my mother when she'd go, did we go see Die Another Day, or did we go see the last one in cinema? Yeah, Mum, yeah, we did. We went to see it in the cinema. You were my hot date. You were my Bond girl for that night. But yeah, I have a lot of love for and a lot of fond memories of the Goldeneye at the cinema, at my local Oma cinema, family-run cinema for many years. Some people I've known over the years have referred to as the cowshed of a cinema, but it still was a beautiful place for me, and I have a lot of fond memories of seeing a lot of cinematic classics such as Goldeneye there, and that's where we'll start. We'll go back to 1995. Pierce is brought in, brings 007 back to the big screen. 89, I think, was the last time we'd seen. Was it 6 years? Dalton had given up, and then there was kind of various issues and wranglements, which meant there was the delay, because normally about every 2-3 years we would have got a 007 film, and there'd been a longer than usual delay, and then Pierce came on board, and it was, Joe, you'll probably correct me. I don't know, because I assume, Joe, you're kind of our Bond aficionado on this pod this evening. But I think this was originally planned as a Dalton Bond before, kind of just with age and things, he had to walk away. So, I mean, it does feel like very much. This is something I will say, and I'll throw this right away. The first two Bonds that we have with Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, they feel very Dalton-esque in the 007 we get, and then in the latter two it feels like they just revert back, and it's like kind of near the end Roger Moore, and that's the kind of Bond we get. But I will talk about that in more detail. But I think I'm right in that sense that this was originally going to be a script that was conceived for Dalton's tenure.
Yeah, I think so. But the thing about Brosnan and Bond, he was originally supposed to have taken over after Moore, but it was because of his contract with Remington Steele, he kind of couldn't do it because of scheduling differences. But I think, yeah, you're right in saying that it was sort of envisioned as a third for Dalton. But once Brosnan signed on board, they sort of did a few rewrites to make it more suitable towards himself. So, yeah, that was basically the starting point. Then it was a semi-third film for Dalton.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, I do think it does succeed in bringing, I think that was the big issue, I think, for 007, bringing Bond out of the Cold War and trying to make him relevant to audiences again in the mid-90s. And I think, this is probably one of my favorite 007 films. It's up there. License to Kill is one. Goldfinger, because it's quintessential 007. From Russia with Love. We're going away from the Pierce tenure, but this for me is up there in kind of high caliber Bond that I have a lot of love for. I'll throw it out to the panel. Is anyone not a fan of Goldeneye, or is anyone just like me, do you think that this is kind of what I would describe as quintessential 007?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's one of the high quality, or you could almost class as prestige James Bond films. There always seems to be the divide between what's kind of schlocky, silly, stupid, and then you kind of have your Goldeneyes, your Skyfalls, your On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where you think like this is a prestige James Bond picture. The thing that I always really like as well with the film where you're talking about sort of like pulling out of the Cold War is, I think, the introduction of Judi Dench, who we'll get for probably the next 8 films. And just like the scene, and I just love it so much when I watch it now, is that scene where the two of them come together, where like we've got this female M. I can't even remember if there was any sort of discourse at the time in the 90s about a female M. Probably you would get more of that these days. But just like when they confront each other, where they're sizing each other up, and she's like highlighting that he's this like dinosaur, a relic. Like I just love that the film, similar in a way to Skyfall, kind of looks in on itself as a series and as a character, and tears it all down and builds it back up for a new generation. And I think Bond can be really good at that when it kind of decides to dive a bit deeper into who is James Bond, why is it relevant, and why should we continue to resonate with it as an audience.
I think that's very true, particularly in the first two of Pierce's Bonds. They do that. They do kind of look back and kind of, okay, Tomorrow Never Dies to maybe a lesser extent, but they do to an extent see him as almost like this dinosaur-esque figure, but someone who kind of gets the job done in that sense. And yeah, I would agree with you, Lee. Like it's weird, kind of there's parallels with GoldenEye and some of, well, we can't say the latest Daniel Craig outing, but some of the latter Daniel Craig portrayals of, you know, it's weird for, I know we're jumping from Pierce to Craig, but, you know, Craig went from being kind of earning his 00 status in one film to the next. It's right, you're a relic, you're a dinosaur. But they kind of started that, and that's how they kind of treated Pierce right from the get-go. Kate, you know, what about you from rewatching these, you know, so recently? I know you've all, as I think I've said before we started to record, only one of these I didn't rewatch was GoldenEye, and that's probably because I could have sat down with the pen and paper and wrote the script. I've seen it so many times over the years. But, you know, for you, Kate, what's your thoughts on rewatching GoldenEye so recently?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, like you're right, Lee, it's very self-aware. And I love that it's more, you know, that sort of dialogue between M and James Bond. I just felt like, you know, watching that now as an adult, it's felt like, yeah, let's stick it to the man. He kind of just, I mean, he still kind of does what he wants at the end of the day, and he does get the job done. And I think the first two films, that's really present there. I think they try and kind of keep it up for the second two films, but it just sort of goes a bit downhill. And then obviously when it comes to Die Another Day, where, you know, he is kind of defunct and he's a relic, I just I think GoldenEye really stands up for me, and The World Is Not Enough as well. I think that's my second favorite of the Pierce Brosnan films. So yeah, I was surprised because I think the first time I watched them all, I didn't really rate Pierce Brosnan. But for me, he kind of feels like the quintessential Bond, where he's just kind of that mix of like, you know, kind of smarmy, you know, spy, like misogynist. But also, I don't know, like I've just kind of having this like mental battle watching them, going like, do I like him as Bond? I don't know. Like I enjoy him. I think he's probably one of the best Bonds, but I don't know. I need to I'm still mulling over it.
I know you've kind of mentioned that. What is it about him that you don't like, Kate? Or what is it you find off-putting?
I don't know. Because I love, I think it's maybe just the smarminess and I don't know, but then they all kind of have that attitude, especially because Roger Moore is probably my favorite Bond, but he's worse. Like he's the most misogynist Bond and the smarmiest, but I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. Maybe this podcast will find the source of it, and I'll be able to articulate what it is. But I love Pierce, but there's just something that I can't put my finger on.
I think there's maybe something about us being 90s kids as well, isn't there? Where like you look at that smarminess, you're like, yeah, we all kind of knew a sort of a James Bond style kind of person in our lives or around, or our politicians were very much of that. Well, we don't have wars now. We can just sort of go and do what we want. We have like Bill Clintons, etc. There seems to be sort of quite a few historical parallels that we probably see in these carefree heroes where they're like, they're just going around having a good time, and they don't seem to be burdened with like the Cold War that we had kind of in the previous James Bond era, and then this kind of post 9/11 that followed sort of Die Another Day.
All those people that we knew, Lee, they're all probably sat and read like GQ and that type of thing. They'd have a copy of GQ under their arm and walk around the place going, "I'm James Bond. Oh yes." They wouldn't have read the classy stuff like I did, like the good old Loaded days. Just when I was keeping it real, maybe a bit of Q, They went highbrow. There is things I definitely see that by the end of Pierce's tenure, by Die Another Day, that he's really guilty of in terms of whether it's him or the screenwriters, that I don't want to talk too much about now, but I want to come back to something that Lee meant and that Lee mentioned, and the importance of Judi Dench. Like, you look at that now, and that's a masterstroke of casting and what they did. I think that relationship really does. I know that kind of has crossed over and went into the Daniel Craig Bonds as well, but I think her Judi Dench's and Pierce, that relationship that they had really did kind of define Pierce's tenure, and I think was a key part, I think, in revitalizing Bond. Because I suppose you look at it to an extent, I think 95, going to show me age, you probably go back to like I hate talking about like the girl power kind of thing and the Spice Girls. I remember we did a screening of The Craft, and I was like, I don't get it. I don't get The Craft. And I was told, well, you just weren't a teenage girl in the 90s. And you're like, right, okay, that's completely correct. But, Joe, Kate, I'll come to you first. Joe, do you think that is a key thing, the masterstroke that they had? Because there is a lot of, solid British performers throughout all of the 007s, throughout all the Pierce Brosnan tenure Bonds. But I think Judi Dench being there and that relationship, that it evolved from kind of someone who just did not get 007 to, by the end, of kind of like the strict aunt. It's like, yes, okay, I'll accept you. I kind of need you, but I still disapprove of a lot of things and how you get things done.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, she completely revitalized the character of M in total. Like, before, you think about, M as a character throughout even the likes of Moore and Dalton's hours. It was just literally oh, James, you have this mission, or else, James, you've gone rogue, you can't go rogue, and all this here stuff. That's all he was. Just show up, say that, and that was it. Like, I think License to Kill, that's all he does. He tries to rein Bond in, say, oh, this isn't your problem, so don't chase it. And he's like, no, it is. And then he goes off and he goes rogue. And that's all M does. He doesn't even come back at the end to sort of, welcome him back to the fold, as it were. Whereas, like you say, with Judi Dench's, there is there's at times like a battle of wills between the two of them, but it's all at in service of getting the job done for the country.
I think she definitely made the character of M a bigger part of the series.
Yeah,
I think it's something that's to an extent has been lost. Like, even with an actor like Ralph Rafe, but I think that's kind of been lost, and it seems to have kind of been knowingly threw back to the earlier days of I'm sure we can come back to that. I don't want to let myself, more than anything, talk too much about Daniel Craig tenure, but Kate, for yourself, the importance of Judi Dench's
Yeah, I think she just brings something. She's more of a presence. She calls him out for basically not doing what he's told and going off the books or whatever, but she knows that he's going to do it anyway and just kind of accepts that. Especially, in the likes of Die Another Day, where, they meet in the underground bunker and like, you're still alive, so we're just going to keep going here. And I get the sense that, like, she has this expertise herself. She's more than capable of doing that kind of work. Like, she activates the tracker and The World Is Not Enough. And I enjoyed that scene where, you can just tell. I'd like to see, maybe more of her kind of backstory, and it kind of makes you think she's just a, you can get like a well-rounded character out of that. And I really enjoy their chemistry together.
Yeah, I think she makes that character of M much bigger than what it is, and something that's an important aspect of it. Moving away from Judi Dench, but sticking with the Bond girls. We have Xena on the top. We have isn't it Frame Jansen is playing her, but I can never remember the name of the actress who plays Natalia. But now, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's one of the few times we see in Pierce's tenure an age-appropriate relationship between the two. I think there's only a year or two between the two. Like, The World Is Not Enough, which we will come on to, with Denise Richards, who looks like she's Lara Croft in every sense with the wonderfully named Dr. Christmas Jones. I thought Christmas only came once a year, ha ha ha. But I think there's like 18, 19 years between those two. And I know this is a problem with, that has always been around Bond. And then you think, I know, I said previously I didn't want to talk too much about Daniel Craig, but, it has been an issue that has been present there. But at least there, Natalia, she's a very different type of character from what we've seen in the past. But it's at least an age-appropriate relationship for 007, if you want to call it a relationship. I don't know. Is that something collectively, going back to watch those 4 films, is that something that you found yourself being aware of? Because it really was, for me, I have to say. It's weird. Like, I think, would Madonna also be seen as an age-appropriate relationship? And you're kind of going, like, yeah, okay. If we really want to talk about Madonna. But I don't know. Maybe it's just something I was just noticed when I watched the 3 films back to back. I see as it went on, it's kind of like the thing, Pierce, no one's allowed to talk about Pierce's age, but the girls, it's like Matthew McConaughey. That's the good thing about college girls. I get older, they say the same age. But I don't know, any of you thinking about that when you went back and rewatched those 4 films?
Always been
Yeah, I
conscious
definitely
of
noticed
it.
that.
Yeah, I've always been a bit conscious of it in like Die Another Day in particular. I always thought like I just had to like look at it there. I always thought like Sophie Marceau and Pierce Brosnan in The World Is Not Enough were in and around the same age, but I think there's like a 13-year gap between the two. So yeah, I was wrong on that one as well.
Kate, what about you? You were kind of talking there as well. Was that something you were very aware of?
Yeah, I'm actually just looking up the age differences now. But yeah, I think with most films, I'm always aware of age differences. Let me see, age difference. Like you say, it just kind of just the gap increases, and obviously that's always something I find problematic. Let me see.
It is like, I'm not sure who mentioned Die Another Day. Like, it is awkward with Rosamund Pike. I will come back to Rosamund Pike because that was a film that very early on made me, that and Jack Reacher were 2 films that made me think, oh, she's that type of actress. And how wrong was I? I mean, she's fucking amazing. She's an amazing performer. And, you see stuff like Gone Girl, and more recently, I Care a Lot. You just see what a performer she is. And I think, I know we're jumping from one film to another. Die Another Day, I think, was her first big screen debut. And I think she only got that because somebody else dropped out. But we'll not go there. Let's go back to GoldenEye. I mentioned Xena on the Top. There was someone, they were trying to kind of do something different with the kind of the Bond girl trope. Successfully or not, I don't know. I was a teenage boy when I watched this, so I probably had very different kind of ideas around Xena on a Top than I would now. I'd probably more be like that actual, is it the captain or the admiral that dies by I would say by the hands, but by the thighs of Xena on a Top. I think I would be that guy now, rather opposed to the horny teenager that I was back then when I watched this for the first time round. But generally, I mean, with the 2, going back to GoldenEye specifically, how do we look at the kind of the Bond girl idea, the concept, and how it's kind of used and utilized within the first of Pierce's films?
It's these 2 big extremes, aren't they? Where on a top is this sort of sex deranged woman who squeezes men to death, which I just watching that. I mean, it made me laugh. And you get Natalia, who's this more kind of, she's capable, but maybe I kind of find, her background where she's, I don't think she's sort of trained in anything. She's just, coding or whatever. And suddenly very capable of using guns and stuff. I don't know. What was her background? I can't really remember if she was sort of trained in all this. But yeah, it's that kind of 2 extremes of Bond girl, which I don't know. I mean, I find most Bond girl kind of problematic, really. But I think that's just me as a woman anyway. That's how I kind of perceive the films.
I think it's something that the Broccoli's himself did try to address, and then in the first 2 films they tried to address it and then they've just kind of completely forgot it and said, you know what, that's not what audiences want. It's weird when you look at the Broccoli's and what they've done, because they kind of react. The films always kind of react to what else is going on. And then, like with the failure of Die Another Day, they then go, right, we've got to go back and take it all away and revitalize it, make it, you know, a younger Bond, take away the gadgets. And that's kind of when you look at kind of like with Jason Bourne, we see less of a Teflon kind of superhero that hardly gets bloodied, to what we see in Daniel Craig, to someone who's kind of at times, well, he technically dies at some point in Casino Royale, but at least there again, jumping from, you know, Pierce to Craig, I think one of the few really, if you want to say that, positive Bond girls, and I know I hate that term Bond girl, but we see Eva Green's in Casino Royale is probably one of the few real bright sparks, I think, for portrayal, for female portrayal within the franchise. But that Craig tenure discussion is for another time. You know, Lee, Joe, where are you going to weigh in here? Particularly, as I say, we'll focus right now on GoldenEye.
I think it's one of those ones, like, I think if I can remember correctly, like, in GoldenEye, there is not really any sort of James Bond having sex, really. Like, it's implied that he kind of, I think they maybe sort of redoing it about to do it in the bushes towards the end, but it's very much a kind of
James Bond doesn't do it in the bushes. Bond is classier than that. Lee. We like to think he's not Eggsy from oh god, what's
Kingsman,
that? The Kings. He's not that guy. Bond is, you know, he's a little bit, you know, highbrow.
Champagne in the car.
Absolutely.
Although there is, in one of the Bond films, there is an anal joke, and we see Pierce's little face bright up, and you're like going, I always thought you were better than Eggsy, but no, you're not. But anyway, sorry, I cut across you, Lee. I apologize.
No. I think it's interesting because with like the Dalton films, for example, and I suppose it's always so difficult. It's hard to talk about these films sometimes in isolation. There was very much the conscious decision that they wanted to move away from seeing James Bond as this sexual being and sexually active, sort of due to the AIDS and HIV kind of crisis at the time. And there seems to be that little bit of that hangover still in potentially the early 90s with something like kind of GoldenEye. Like, you kind of get something like On a Top, which kind of leans heavily into it. I won't even say it's subtle or heavily implied. It is on the nose. But like, we, you know, even into sort of Tomorrow Never Dies, that's when he seems to become a bit more kind of that sexually active kind of character with kind of women. So yeah, it's interesting when you kind of watch GoldenEye and, you know, you view kind of this kind of very bookish kind of character where he seems to have that kind of really good working kind of relationship with, and then sort of, yeah, there's a really conscious change that I think will be really interesting with Tomorrow Never Dies that we can touch on.
Mm-hmm. Joe, kind of anything else you want to add into what Kate and Lee have said?
Not particularly, no. Like, you know, I kind of agree with Lee there and what he's saying. You know, there was that hangover from the Dalton era into, you know, with early Brosnan anyway, of where I wouldn't say it was a, you know, a sexless Bond, but you know, the focus as such wasn't on so much in like how many women he could bed or anything like that. And even the women in the film, you know, they're, like you said, there is an effort to try and make them more than just objects or bimbos or whatever, you know, as they were earlier portrayed. Like with even Xena on the Top, you know, there was kind of, you know, there's part of her that kind of reminded me of Mayday from View to a Kill. But I think it's almost to a point, you know, the way she is, just this really oversexed character. It's almost to parody, it's almost to making fun of those past elements, going, right, if you thought, like, you know, James Bond was mad for just having sex with everyone, like, this is a woman who literally derives sexual pleasure from pain, you know, and we're just going to throw her into the mix like this. And the way she's contrasted with, is it Natasha or Natalia? Natalia, the way she's a much more conservative and she's, you know, resourceful and focused on her work in that.
But the focus, the kind of switch of balance, again, this is the one film I didn't get a chance to rewatch. That kind of compare and contrast and isn't just done with the character of Natalia, because I think Xena on the Top is first introduced, they're out for a drive. It's one of the few times, sadly, during Pierce's tenure that we get to see him out driving in the Aston Martin. I think, is it a psychologist or a psychiatrist is out to kind of evaluate him?
Yeah.
And she's quite a timid female character, and then he's racing against her. Isn't she in the Ferrari, if I remember right? Or she's it's a red car. That's probably as technical I'm going to be. 4 cars. It's red and it's got 4 wheels. and I think it's got the hood down, and she's racing against him, and you see that comparison between her and then this very timid female character, who of course then, well, Pierce does what Pierce does. Thankfully, not in the bushes, Lee. Not in the bushes. He's classier than that. He has. Go on ahead, Lee. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting when you kind of. I never really sort of consider it there. We're talking about obviously these two kind of the female leads in this, but then in addition to sort of this female authority pushing back on the chauvinistic 90s man, you've also kind of even got the change in sort of Moneypenny, someone that before that would always swoon to Bond. Oh, James, are those flowers for me? I think I'm sure it's in this film. They all kind of blur into one a little bit sometimes, which is like, as I recall, you've never had me, and it's just like she puts him in his place. Even that sort of psychologist is one of those ones. Like, yeah, we get kind of told afterwards that sort of he's had a bit of a way with this woman, but very much these British women are pushing back on sort of the idea of James Bond. What he would have got away with previously.
Yeah, but I think Samantha Bond's Moneypenny. I'm sorry, Kate. I'm sorry, I think Samantha Bond's Moneypenny would. That's as classy as I'm going to get. I think, she might not have him, but I think if Pierce one day after a, relatively exhausting mission would say, let's go back to the Craig tenure when we see Bond being shaved by Moneypenny. Samantha Bond's Moneypenny would have done more than that. That's just that as classy as there. In terms of GoldenEye, kind of going into the specifics of the plot, we have a rogue 007. I think that's probably the closest we've seen really to an extent would be the man with the golden gun, kind of a rogue, kind of so-called person meant to be in the power, a goodie. Sorry, for bar the lack of a better term, a goodie going rogue. But yeah, I like Sean Penn, or not Sean Penn. That would be a brilliant. Sean Bean. I love Sean Bean in this. He is. I thought he was a really good. Again, it's going back to the idea of what the Bond villain had become, and this idea, and it's something that we see creeping back into the later Pierce Bonds, the later Pierce tenure as 007, where you have to have the massive lair, and there's some kind of uniqueness about their character and their physicality, and we didn't really. We kind of got it with Bean's Alex, but I think again as a villain, I thought it was a really solid way to kind of start kind of Pierce's tenure. I mean, that's kind of as vague without going into too many plot spoilers for people who maybe haven't seen any of them. But generally, the specifics of GoldenEye, as I said, I think it's a really solid start for Pierce as 007. But what do we think? Villains, we haven't even mentioned the Bond boy, Alan Cummings as the self-proclaimed Boris, I'm invincible, the one and only Bond boy. But yeah, as I say, it's a film that always puts a smile on my face. It's a bit like those classics. If I find it on the TV, I genuinely find myself, no matter where I'm coming in, I'll probably sit and watch it to the end. Particularly, isn't it the sequence with the helicopter? I think is great. The sequence with the helicopter and they have to eject out, I just think is fantastic. Isn't there a joke about I give you the same 7 minutes? No, that's in the train. The same 7 minutes or something you give me. As I say, it's been a while since I've seen it, but no, I think it's solid. I'm rambling. Someone kind of please interject.
I like it with the villain as well, and we see it with some of the kind of ones to come with the Craig era, is the idea of these villains it's not just someone that's got this massive scheme, it's like, how are they a mirror for our James Bond kind of character? Both are orphans, both are the 00 agents, and then there's that split. How did they sort of become different? And you can imagine a reality where it's James Bond on the other side, and that's always quite an interesting kind of dynamic to watch.
Joe, Kate?
Well, yeah, just sort of mirroring what Lee was saying there. Trevelyan, just the fact that he is, the other side of the coin of Bond, and then how they went into that further with Javier Bardem and Skyfall. Like, this is sort of the beginnings of that, and then, like you said, it hasn't really been looked at before, except for maybe, like you said, the man with the golden gun. Like, it's always been like a megalomaniac sort of villain with some sort of trait or something about them that makes them, tries to separate them from someone else. Whereas, he's just, embittered by, what happened to him. And the thing about it, like, if you went into GoldenEye cold without actually knowing, what sort of was going to happen, because I remember when I went into it, like, I remember seeing trailers or something and knowing that Sean Bean was the villain as such. Like, you know, that sort of let me down. But the moment where he's revealed, I can only imagine, you know, if you're in the cinema and you've never seen that, you'd be like, oh wait, what's happening here?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was really good. And then Boris is just great as like a little sub villain. You know, like you've had them before with, I know I'm just thinking top of my head, Knick Knack or something like that there. Just go back to the man with the golden gun. But yeah, Boris, and you're just always constantly waiting for him to get his comeuppance. He's just this wee slimy character. He's always getting away with what he's doing.
I think he's a nice also villain-esque or villain or antagonist for Natalia as well, because, you know, there's that relationship between the two that, you know, I think they both are hackers and they're both kind of into their coding, but Boris is like, I am better. That's probably as good as Alan Cummings, his Russian accent. But that again, it's that idea of that it's not just all about 007, you know, whilst yes, they're all connected, but at least there's an attempt to give her own little arc away. I think I remember there was a time when I thought she was a bit of a wet blanket, and I know she, to an extent you could probably argue that she is, but I do think that in an understated way, I think she's one of the most underrated. Again, I hate that term. I'm sorry, Kate, but the Bond girls, I think she's really underrated in what she does. And again, she gets to get a line about what is it about you boys with your toys or your guns. I can't. Again, it's been that long since I've seen it. I apologize. But she, again, and following on what Lee was mentioning on it, she's always questioning what 007 stands for. She still, you know, falls for him in the end, but who wouldn't? Gorgeous out Pierce. He's gorgeous, as Mustard would say. But I think, yeah, I mean, anything else you want to say about GoldenEye, other than the song's great, but that's the only reason it's great, because it's Tina Turner and it's written by Bono on the Edge. So, of course, it's great. But anything else you want to kind of say about GoldenEye before we move swiftly on to Tomorrow Never Dies?
Yeah, I think I agree with what's been said. I really enjoy, I think Sean Bean's my favourite villain in this tenure, because, you know, they've come from a similar background, and you can kind of, there's more of a kind of personal tension in this James Bond, because, you know, they've been allies, they've worked together. And I think for me, I definitely remember the first time I watched it, I didn't know that he was going to come back as the villain. So I remember being really shocked and, oh no, Sean Bean. And yeah, I just think that's definitely just the strongest one for me overall.
Yeah, I get what we'll ask this at the end, but I get a sense that GoldenEye might be the strongest of the four. It's definitely mine, but we'll come back to that. We move on then to 97, Tomorrow Never Dies, which is Pierce's second outing as 007. And I think, isn't it David Arnold is the first time he's brought on board for kind of working with you, who's someone who's really become synonymous with 007. It's the first time he's involved as well. And this was a Bond, again, I saw this at the cinema. At the time, I was slightly underwhelmed, and I know it's kind of like the common undercurrent, but I think now, in this era of falsehoods and fake news, it's aged better than probably, okay, I think we've all agreed GoldenEye's kind of timeless, it's quite quintessential 007, but I think of the four, it's probably, there's certain parts of it undeniably have aged, but I think the elements of Elliot Carver and his megalomaniac, who may or may not be Rupert Murdoch, we cannot possibly say, and his desire to manipulate and dictate the news and get his way by dictating the news and the agenda, it's probably more relevant now, weirdly, than it were. And also, like, the fact, the underlying thing of, like, with China as well, the relationship there, and the kind of, there's just loads of things I think I think it's well ahead of its time. I can understand why people probably thought it was a bit stupid and buffoonish in 97, but I really like this. And what of the three films I went back and rewatched, this is of the three, the one that I kind of quite happily, like, if The World Is Not Enough or Dying on a Day, if the disc had been too badly damaged and it stopped or whatever, it's like, oh well, maybe watch another Bond or maybe watch another time. But this, I actually thoroughly enjoyed. I sat up, I think, was it last night? I watched it about 11:30 and got to bed about 1 o'clock and thoroughly enjoyed it. Really, really enjoyed this. And we've even got Sheryl Crow singing. It'll be really great with Sheryl Crow, but Sheryl Crow singing a great, I think, again, underrated Bond song. So yeah, generally, I mean, we've been very specific on GoldenEye and probably taken up a lot of time on this recording. about GoldenEye, but generally, where do we rank Tomorrow Never Dies? We've already said none of you saw this at the cinema first time round. I went to see it in the cinema with my mum. Nah. And I remember she came out of it and was like, no, that's all a load of nonsense. Bring me back Blofeld. That's what I want. That's what I want from my 007. And I maybe at the time it was it's a bit weird, a bit hokey, but I as I say, I like this film a lot. And before we get into the specifics, I'll start with you, Joe. Where do you rate Tomorrow Never Dies?
I'm going to come in with a hot take. I think it's Brosnan's best. That's just me speaking. I think it's because I've close it's a place in my heart, because when I first saw it, I was at a sleepover at my cousin's and I hadn't seen GoldenEye at this stage, but I'd loved Bond, and then I thought Bond had ended after Dalton. Like, I didn't know there was anything else after that. So it was a case of, this James Bond film. I was like, well, what are you talking about? There's no more Bond. Like, Bond's finished, I thought. And then they were like, oh, no, wait till you watch this. And then, like, mind just completely blown, and I absolutely loved it. From the very opening sequence where he's trying to fly the fighter jet, away that's carrying the missile. I was hooked from there on in. So this was really my introduction to the Brosnan era. The reason I love it so much is, when I was actually rewatching as well, it's for those reasons you were saying, the idea of, fake news becoming more prevalent now, and how that ties in that. And the fact that this was done, this was made around the infancy of, the internet in the mainstream, it just makes you think, it's amazing how, it works today. And I absolutely love Jonathan Pryce as that villain. He's just chewing the scenery at every turn, but in the best way possible.
He's having a ball. He is having
absolutely.
an absolute ball, and he knows it.
Even that minor henchman, I don't know the actor's name. He's Dr. Kaufman, the expert in killing people.
Yeah.
And it's actually this film that actually it harkens back a bit to Dalton, because it's that scene with Dr. Kaufman. There's that coldness to Bond that comes when he kills him. He has him by the throat, and he could just apprehend him in any way. He was like, no, I'm just going to kill you because of what's transpired in that scene. But as well as that, there's the chase scene as well with the helicopter, and Bond and Michelle Yeoh's character on the motorbike, and they're handcuffed together, and their dynamic together, and how they have to work together in order to get out of the situation. And then the finale and the sort of submarine boat thing. But I absolutely loved Tomorrow Never Dies, and I still do.
I think it's great. My only thing with, like you mentioned, Michelle Yeoh, because again, she's great. And like, I know, like we'll mention in Die Another Day, for so long there was talk of a Jinx movie with Halle Berry's character. There would be a character I would love to have seen getting her own, her own outing free from 007, because she's great. My only gripe with her is at the end, it's like, sadly, she's also seduced by the charms of Oil Pierce, that Irish charm as 007, because she goes from being, it's like kind of a bit of a flirtatious relationship, but professional, but flirtatious, to the end, it's like, okay, I've nearly died. You've saved my life. Let's just get it on in this weird stealth boat, the wreckage of this weird stealth boat. That's my only niggle with her character. I just wish they had kind of kept it professional to the end. But it's also weird watching it on DVD last night. There's a lot of like familiar faces. I think isn't Hugh Bonneville is there as kind of, I don't know if it's his first outing. And I was flicking through there because I wanted to be certain it was Hugh Bonneville before I said, I'm pretty certain I saw Hugh Bonneville there, pre-Downton and pre-Paddington 2. But you also have, I'm noticing here, Gerard Butler is in there. Someone I don't think I think he's down as that breakthrough role for him of leading seaman on HMS Devonshire. Or Mrs. Insert rude pun 007, would you please? But it was just weird seeing a young Hugh Bonneville on the boat. I think he's one of the ones when they're near the finale. I think he's kind of radioing through kind of positions of things. But that's just me. Lee, Kate, I'll start with you, Kate. Where are you going to rank Tomorrow Never Dies?
I think, although I really enjoy it, I think it probably would be sort of third of the Pierce Brosnan films, even though it's my favorite concept. I think just the idea of, creating starting a war for the sake of sort of securing your position as a sort of media mogul. And I think Jonathan Pryce is amazing. That part where he sort of just starts doing karate in front of Wei Lin just cracks me up. That's hilarious. And I really love her as a Bond girl as well. I think she's the most, she kind of matches him, I think. And especially in that sort of sequence with the motorcycle, I just think they're just working together, and she's very assertive and she's really powerful. It feels like quite low to be third, but I think because I love Goldeneye so much and The World Is Not Enough, that's sort of I think that was maybe the first one I watched of Pierce Brosnan. So that's kind of a, emotional favorite, I suppose. But I think, yeah, it's a really strong one.
I can't remember where I saw it, but I remember watching, and I'm nearly certain it was a program on BBC where they showed kind of how they shot the helicopter sequence. I can't remember what it
came free, like it was hosted by Desmond Llewellyn. I remember I had the Tomorrow Never Dies big bulky box set which had like art cards, and it had this video where like Desmond Llewellyn took you behind the scenes on making the film, and you can like, I think with the Blu-ray or DVD or digital copy, you can access that special feature documentary. Is well worth checking out.
Because it's fab. That sequence is fab. It's up there. I think they were clearly looking back, and we didn't even mention it when we talked about GoldenEye, the sequence with the tank, which I think a lot of people love. I mean, I know I mentioned stuff with the helicopter. I think there was a clear sense of kind of like, we have to try and either, equal or better what we did before. And I think that sequence, the sheer practicality of it all, and kind of that complications where we have Michelle Yeoh and Pierce, they're both kind of controlling they're both controlling the bike at the same time, is greatly, generally for you. I haven't even mentioned Terry Hatcher here at so far, someone who Pierce did not get on with. I remember vividly hearing an interview where they did not get on, they did not gel. He did not like his time working with her. But without going to talk, and just because I mentioned her, Terry Hatcher, your general thoughts on Tomorrow Never Dies?
The same as all of you, I mentioned. I really, really enjoy this film. I think because this was like such a critical James Bond movie for me as a fan, it's always kind of stuck with me. And I just think like all the action sequences are good. Elliot Carver is just this wonderful over-the-top villain. It's one of those things, like the film is what? Like, let's just check the runtime here.
I think it's just in a clock and then it just over. I think it's the longest. Or either it or Tomorrow, or either it or down
119 minutes. But you kind of summed up, it feels like a 90-minute movie. Like, if someone went, go put on a James Bond movie, like, it's late in the evening, Tomorrow Never Dies just feels like such an easy one to put on, and it flows really well. It's so lean, there doesn't feel like any baggage. I just really enjoy it, and I think the score as well is fantastic. I remember I didn't get the chance to go see the film. We went to see Flubber instead as a family, but I remember being able to pick up the soundtrack. And I think it's a real step up from the pretty poor soundtrack of GoldenEye, main title song excluded, where I remembered like the music for like Sinking of the Devonshire, it was a real standout. I remember like playing with my Star Trek toys and like being like having that music on in the background. And actually one of the things I got to enjoy last year was I think a couple of you are fans of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. So Nicholas Meyer obviously wrote and directed The Wrath of Khan. He also had an uncredited involvement on like Tomorrow Never Dies. And it was always one of those things, like I was like, how did he get involved in this film? And I was interviewing him last year, and I was like, we were chatting about like Star Trek and all these other things. And like his memory could be a bit hazy. And then I was like, I've always been curious, like, what did you do on Tomorrow Never Dies to get this thanks? And he goes, well, Roger Spottiswoode was my brother-in-law, and like I came into the studio to help with like some pitching of ideas, and like this film like 20 plus years old, and he just like starts like quoting like this monologue of like how he would be James Bond and just like his experience. And I was like, oh wow. So like on just so many levels, Tomorrow Never Dies, I think it's just a great 90s action adventure. Like the car sequence, that is so much fun as well. So yeah, like I find it impossible not to enjoy Tomorrow Never Dies, and it's probably become one of my most watched Bond movies over the years.
Well, I can definitely concur. I watched this late last night and I had no problem, even if it was getting, I think it was nearly 1 o'clock before I went to bed. And I did not find myself kind of doing that kind of thing where you're like, oh, will it just kind of pause this and maybe restart that in the morning? It's like, no, I'm going to watch this to the end. I want to see what happens, child stomper. But Terry Hatcher, just because I mentioned, she's not really given that much to do. It's kind of the thing that Bond really started to do. They started to do Double, where it was a named actress getting a very kind of brief, almost cameo-esque performance. And she's not really critical to the plot. She's one of the last, at least normally-ish named Bond girls in Pierce's tenure. Was it Paris Carver? I think she is. At least it's a normal name. At least that's a good thing. We don't have kind of like Jinx or Christmas Jones. Honestly, who calls their children that? And I can't remember what's the one in The World Is Not Enough. What's her name? She's given some.
Electra, is it?
Yeah, it's like, oh, for fuck's sake, honestly, someone has to at least at one point draw the line. It's like, right, just no, we're not going to call our child Electra. No, we're not. Right, she's going to be called Alice. Deal with it. But I don't know. I the one thing I will say, my small Jim McClane niggle, the hill that I'm prepared to die on. I love the whole idea of the stealth boat, and it's probably the closest you're going to get to throwing back to the old classic era of Bond. And they're like, oh no, we can't see it. But like in the scene with the Devonshire, like, does anyone just like kind of not look like ever so slightly over to the side of off to the side, off the starboard bow, and went, what the fuck's that thing? Sorry, I know we have an expletive rating, but there's no one just seems to be completely oblivious to the fact, or does the Chinese planes that are flying past, do they not kind of go, what is that weird kind of the thing? It looks a bit like the Batmobile for Christian Bale. What is it? I love it as a concept, but it's just when you look back and you go, how the heck? Because it's huge. Like I was thinking, it's a really small thing, but no, it's huge.
But stealth technology, and they do under the cover of darkness in the sea where there's not going to be much like light in. I can buy it. I can buy it.
Come on, Lee. Like, a part of me is kind of thinking, going, would it not have been better if they just kind of went with the kind of, a sexy submarine? You could see through that, or those really super sexy submarines, isn't it, from Thunderball? They had one of those and they could have done it. Come on, is no one else going to back me up? Is this not a small hill you're prepared to die on?
No, right. Look at it this way. In the history of the whole franchise, Blofeld built a lair in a volcano, and this is going to be your gripe. An active volcano, I should say that as well.
It hasn't erupted yet. It hasn't erupted.
It has. The film ends with him blowing it up.
Okay.
he blew it up.
He blew it up, But anyway.
Anyway, yeah.
I don't know. It's a small niggle, I have to admit, but it's just like kind of going like, really? Like, you're all so focused on these two planes. There's nobody going to look out and go like, what's that thing? But I don't know. Yeah, I think, I don't know. Is there anything really kind of other kind of specific? As I say, we have talked a lot in this pod about Goldeneye, and we've kind of wrangled in little bits of other films. But anyone really want to show? I know we've mentioned Michelle Yeoh. I think she's great. And I love that sequence where it's kind of her kind of, her gadget room kind of thing kind of going off. I love that kind of thing. And you've mentioned the sequence with the remote control car. I do love the look of just a 5-year-old on Christmas Day being given the present that he always wanted. That look of childish glee that Pierce has when he crashes the car into the Avis kind of thing. It's just that little face of like, yes. It's like, do you know that kid in that meme? The yes. That's what Pierce looks like for me in that. We haven't really mentioned Robert Llewellyn. He's a nice face to see back, and a nice familiar face to see back as Q. His last outing is in the next film, in The World Is Not Enough, which every time I see it now, it always brings a massive lump to my throat. The kind of, what is it he says? It's like always have an escape plan or something, and he just kind of goes down underground. And by the time that film was released, he had, I think, was it a car crash? Or
he died in a car crash back from a convention or something. And I think I still feel really sad about it, because it's just like, he's just such a nice old person, and I just wanted him to have like a happy ending. And I remembered just seeing that headline at the time that he died, and it's one of those ones, like, I think when you're like a kid of the 90s, like I remember things like, let's see, Star Trek, for example, like you remember when like DeForest Kelley dies, and then something like this where you're like, he's like that first real Bond icon to die, and you're just sort of like reminded these things don't live in the bubble that you always think they will.
And John Cleese took his job. John Cleese took his job. But I again, we were talking about that spiky, and I know that's kind of a thing between Q and Bond, that relationship, that spiky relationship, that, oh, do grow up, 007. But I love that even more. I think it's because of the age difference. By the time Robert had aged, the time we have with Q, he's older. He does feel like the condescending kind of the grandparent, the parental figure looking over 007 as this man-child. It's like, I mean, we didn't really mention it in GoldenEye, but I think he's at the perfect age, I think, with that relationship and that dynamic that we had between him. Because I think, Lee, you might know this then. I mean, I could be wrong. I think, was that always going to be The World Is Not Enough, I think, was always, going to be his swan song?
I think that was very much the case, that it was always going to be that, and it was heavily leaning towards, I think he was just getting to that retirement stage. But you never say never with something like James Bond. But I remembered, like, going in with the talk when they were making this film at the time, and just like, yeah, John Cleese is going to be he's the replacement. But you'd be surprised if he popped up again.
Yeah, but I mean, for you guys, and just kind of before we kind of move on to The World Is Not Enough, on Robert Rell, I love that relationship. I mean, in Tomorrow Never Dies, just even that sequence with the car and they're first playing about with the remote control car. Again, it's that idea of the kind of, as they come back to like the parent, the grandparent with the child, the grandchild, and just kind of, oh, grow up, you child. I love their relationship. Anybody want to throw anything just kind of before we move on?
No, yeah, like even just going back to how they're introduced to each other in GoldenEye, like just that last bit where like Bond picks up like the sandwich, he's like, "Don't touch that.
That's my lunch."
It's my lunch. Yeah, it's just things like that. Or even when he blows up the dummy and he's like, "Don't say it." He's like, "The writing's on the wall." And he just like shakes his head, but like it's when he shakes his head at that moment, there is like a loving nod. It's like, you do irritate me, but you're all right, James.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I think of all the Bonds, like particularly in GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, and The World Is Not Enough, that little kind of the wait for what gadgets will Bond have this time, that did kind of really become like, it was almost like slapstick and kind of times and stuff, isn't it? Is it one of them, or am I getting my Bonds mixed up? I think it's GoldenEye, isn't it? They go into the telephone box. And
yes, in the background, somebody goes in the phone box, picks up the phone, and then it's like an airbag almost just explodes.
It's like Naked Gun. It's like when you look back and watch Naked Gun, there's so much going on screen, and you kind of know it was lovingly done. It never took away, like it never took you out, like it never wrecked the tone of the film or anything like that. It was quite a slapsticky moment at times, but it worked, and you knew him again at the fact we have Q, who's been there. I think. Is it Goldfinger or is it after Goldfinger? We've had Q, the character, because he's not there in Doctor No. Is it Goldfinger we first see Q, or is it?
I think so. Yeah, because I don't think he's in From Russia with Love.
No,
and he's not in the film after Moonraker. Is he?
What Octopus is it?
No, it's the one. For Your Eyes Only. He's not in that.
Yeah.
Good song, terrible film, but let's not go there. Let's not go down and talk about Roger Moore. So Kate, we're going to move on to The World Is Not Enough. So this is your second favorite Bond?
It's my second. I think it was the one that I most watched with Pierce Brosnan for some reason. May have just been on the TV more than often, but definitely rewatching it. I rewatched that one today, and I think I'm probably going to rethink the rankings because I definitely didn't enjoy it as much. But there is still just something about it. I think it's my favorite song out of the four. And yeah, I don't know. I just enjoy. I really like Robert Carlyle in it. I think his as a villain is just ridiculous. This sort of bullet moving through his brain, and he's just jaded, and he wants to cause untold destruction, and he can't.
He just wants to feel again. He just wants to feel. That's all he wants.
I love it.
He's in a glass case of emotion.
I think I still love it because it just feels like absolute trash, and not as trash as Die Another Day, but I still enjoyed it, but it's not as good as I remembered.
Do you know actually what I hadn't realized? I mean, because this is the thing that I mentioned, there was a Bond film that I have. Anytime we talk about Bond, I always go, it's such an underrated 007. The World Is Not Enough. Great song, great villain. It's just quintessential 007. And I watched this yesterday afternoon, and I was kind of like, it was like almost kind of like we were talking in a previous podcast about going back and look at watching Eddie Murphy and Delirious and Raw, and you're like, oh, okay, it's not that level of bad in those, but you're just like, I've had the love for this, and I don't know why, because they've done the Dalton-esque Bond with Pierce for 2 films. I would still say, Tomorrow Never Dies, we still have a Dalton-esque Bond. But here we have a real throwback, I think, to the Roger Moore tenure. And we see that, as I mentioned very earlier on, with Christmas Jones. And it's like, I'm sorry, Pierce, she could be your daughter. She could be your daughter. And she's there. And she calls him out, I think, because his Russian is very good. It's like, I've been to Cambridge. I don't know why I did that voice. But it's a weird... And do you know what I was thinking when I was watching this? The World Is Not Enough should have been the 20th Bond. It just feels to me, it's that Michael Apted is the director, who sadly passed away earlier this year. Great British director, filmmaker. And again, it's got a lot of callbacks to the early Bonds as well. I think had this been the 20th anniversary Bond, I think I would have, looking back on it, I would have been kinder to it. But I don't know. And the actress who plays Electra, I think she's in Braveheart. That's the only thing I can really think her of. She's terrible.
Oh, I'm throwing down challenge flags. I can't accept any more of this. I would still be on the side that this is an underrated James Bond film. I actually see a lot of parallels between this and Skyfall. Like, I think it's an incredibly personal James Bond film. Like, M is the target, and I even think at the time, like, it's taken like 19 James Bond films for it to be a predominantly female villain as well, which I think is a really interesting dynamic. I would completely disagree as well with the Roger Moore assessment. There's the odd little bits here and there. I would say this is a bit closer to Dalton and Connery in points with the personal line, with the personal edge that the film has. I mean, I think the bit where Bond shoots Electra King right in the head, and he's like, I never miss. Like, it is just absolutely brutal and cold-blooded, that killing. I think it's a really underrated film, and I really enjoy that personal side to it. I think it's got a really large scope and scale as well. Like, Christmas Jones really does, I think, drag the film down at points, but overall I think it's really strong, and it makes use of M in a way that before we've had, even in GoldenEye, and then she's kind of thrown out the window really altogether in Tomorrow Never Dies. This is like, you have Judi Dench, you have one of the best British actresses, use her, and it sets up what I think we'll see to come in sort of the Craig movies. I find it highly enjoyable, really interesting, and I think it's got such a nice dark edge for a James Bond film of the 90s. And one thing I would say is I would like it if it was the 20th film as well. But for me, I always think of it as like, it's the Millennium James Bond. It's 1999. I remember the amazing ad campaign they had where it was like, there was a countdown, and it was like, in the countdown to the new millennium, it's good to know there's one number you can still count on, and like it stops on 007, and it just like kicks off. Like, and I always think, what a great Bond that was to sort of wrap the millennium for what Bond was at the time.
See, here's the thing, Lee. See, I'm going to say probably this. If you'd asked me that 24 hours ago, had I not rewatched The World Is Not Enough, I would have agreed with you. I really would have agreed with you. I don't know. I find it kind of very kind of similar to, what's the Christopher Walken, Roger Moore?
View to a Kill?
View to, I find it kind of on a par. And I mean, I love that film. I do love that film, but I look back at it now, and it's too cheesy. And I think my gripe when I watch it now, which I hadn't really picked up in a while, is, and it's something I mentioned, I think really slipped into Brosnan's tenure, is the quipping Bond, the Bond that always has to have a witty one-liner to kind of say something. And it's so guilty of doing that. And yes, it's fun at times. Okay, it's worse. It's fucking far worse in Die Another Day. It's like, what is it? It's like, is it Saved by the Bell again? And like, oh, fuck up, Pierce. Just, you wouldn't say that in real life. I'm sorry, Lee. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to swear. I seen your wee face just kind of going, why is he saying such bad language? But watching it again, I just find it was kind of going back to what Kate said. It's a mess. It's a lovable mess. And I think there's things about it are great. Like, the sequence in the tunnel where they're trying to detonate the bomb, I think is great. It's a little bit kind of, you're very kind of aware with Brosnan's tenure of the amount of CGI coming into stuff, but you're not probably going to be able to do that practically. Okay, Chris Nolan would probably say it demanded that it be done practically, but I don't know. There's something, I think, when you look at GoldenEye, when you look at Tomorrow Never Dies, those are solid Bonds that know what they're doing. This feels to me like something that's just kind of, it's getting caught in nostalgia. It's looking back. It's not really looking forward enough, but I agree with you completely on the idea of taking it away from, it's Bond saving the world, but making it a much more personal storyline, like we had seen with License to Kill, like we would see later on with Skyfall, and making M a character. When you have, as you said, an actress like Judi Dench, use her, she'll read the fucking phone book and you'll listen intently to everything she says. But I don't know. And I think my main gripe watching it again is the actress who plays Elektra. I find her just terribly wooden. And in that sequence where they have the weird kind of torture chair, and it's good, but it's like, men find me so irresistible. You find me irresistible. And you're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe I need to go back and rewatch again, Lee. But I was very aware when I watched this. I was like, going, have I had rose-tinted glasses on for this for too many years? And all we said, like Kate said, that maybe there was GoldenEye, The World Is Not Enough, Tomorrow Never Dies, and then Die Another Day. Die Another Day is always going to be the bottom of that pile. But rewatching them, and having not rewatched Tomorrow Never Dies, I think that's where I'm coming in. Tomorrow Never Dies, I think, is such a better film than I had remembered, and The World Is Not Enough is not as good a film as I remembered. But hey, I love the fact, you've got a name taken from, isn't it, from the family motto, the crest, The World Is Not Enough, all that stuff. It just drips in nostalgia. But anyway, I went off on a bit of a rant. Joe, where are you going to come in? Are you going to side with your Banterflix comrade, or are you going to go with Lee from Filibuster?
Well, I think it's time we moved on to Die Another Day here. Going into, like, when I was actually rewatching them, like, I was sort of half dreading The World Is Not Enough, because I remember when I watched it when I was younger, thinking, oh, this is the boring one from Brosnan's era. That was just me from when I watched it when I was younger. And then upon rewatching, I was like, it's actually quite good, it's much better than I remembered it to be. I thought the opening sequence is probably one of the best opening sequences to any Bond film, with the chase through the themes. As well as that, I think, I did appreciate more that, the sort of links between it and Skyfall, in that it is a very M-centric story, and, how it explores, her relationship within the whole Bond universe, as it were. But when it comes to someone like Christmas Jones, I can't really blame Denise Richards for that. I think she's just completely miscast.
Someone offered her a job and she took it. It's not her fault. It's the writing. The writing's terrible around her character. Yeah, the writing and the casting.
Yeah, I think if you cast a different actress, I think, again, going back to GoldenEye, someone who's more age appropriate to Bond, I think that would have worked a lot better then. Even if you had Monica Bellucci then, it might have worked a bit more, but maybe not in terms of the character, not, but I'm thinking age appropriate.
I'm
thinking too far ahead.
Joe, Monica Bellucci is like a fine wine. That woman just gets better when that woman is. I would have that woman as a Bond girl in her late, when she's nearly 70 or 80, she would still be a stunning Bond girl. Yeah. Sorry. Honorary token red-blooded Jim Mail here, who has a crush on Monica Bellucci. Sorry. We'll not go down. We'll not pull on that thread just now.
Yeah, you're like David Lynch in Twin Peaks. You had your dream about Monica Bellucci, but
can I say one thing? You mentioned the opening sequence, because we didn't talk about that too much. Yeah. It's great, but also it's like watching it now, and maybe that was why it's like, oh fuck, it's got like the Millennium Dome in it, and why not use a landmark like that? And it's like, but it's just like,
no, there was the one thing that dates it more than the Millennium Dome. It's remember in the 90s there was a TV show on the BBC all about parking attendants and how much scum they were. Like, parking attendants that get splashed are the people from this naff BBC reality TV show. Like, they aren't just like random extras, like they are from a terrible BBC show. awful. Like it dates out a bit. Like, but the best action sequence is, of course, the snow chase and stuff. That is such a romp.
Yeah, it's a very much like a throwback to the likes of when Her Majesty Secret Service and The Spy Who Loved Me with that there. And you know, yeah, I do agree with you. I really liked it. And then again, even the sequence with can't remember Robbie Coltrane's character. He's returning from GoldenEye. His name's escaping me, but like when they go to, you know, question him about things, it's the helicopter sequence with that. The helicopters with the razor blades. The only reason I had them is for cutting trees. But you're like, why not just use a chainsaw? Why have this big weird thing with you know, helicopter with you know, blades? But you know, I thought that sequence was really good as well. Like even when you know you have the Bond quip in there. I know you're not a huge fan of them. You know, when it's cutting the car in half, it's like, oh, Q's gonna hate me for this.
It's because they're so practical as well. Like this is the last of that Bond movie where it's like models, you know, less reliant on CGI. We saw like you get such a whiplash going from something like this to Die Another Day.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I'm because I have been on the same wavelength as the three of you for so long, and I think it's because I haven't maybe necessarily sat and watched Bond film and then put on another straight after, then put on another straight after. I watched, I think I'll be honest, okay, I think I put this on because this was one of my favorites behind GoldenEye, and then put on Tomorrow Never Dies. And Tomorrow Never Dies is the one I kind of always went, yeah, it's okay. Wasn't massively a fan of it when I saw it at the cinema, but having went back and just had my eyes reopened to how good that was, maybe that's what I need to go back and, you know, watch The World Is Not Enough with fresh eyes and refresh myself in my love for that film. But I don't know. It just kind of surprised me, kind of how at times, because you're talking about how great that sequence with the skiing is. No, it just didn't do it. It just didn't do it for me. But it's weird. Going back to when I was in the cinema, I love this. I genuinely love this. It's probably, asked me when I was what was this, like 99? This is before the millennium, as Lee said. You know, asked me at the time when that was out, I was probably say, yeah, this is better than GoldenEye. It's just like, no, age supposedly makes me wiser. Probably not. But yeah, I don't know. We'll not agree in this one. I think we're going to agree for probably all the wrong reasons with Die Another Day. Pierce's swan song, shall we say, as 007. And do you know what, weirdly, rewatching it this morning, the Madonna song is the least of that film's problems. I actually quite like the Madonna song in its weird, cheesy, naff, terrible way. I think there's worse Bond songs than Madonna's. There is.
I agree.
Do you know what? I'll be honest.
Sigmund Freud analysed this. Oh my god.
Yes. Thank you. Somebody said that, because re-listening, I was like, this is awful.
It's not the worst though. It's bad, but it's not the worst.
Oh, it is. It's clearly the worst.
It's the Bond song.
That's when you knew the film was gonna be downhill from there. It's as soon as that song starts, you're like, oh no, because the opening's actually pretty good and it sets up a neat premise. You know, Bond's been captured, and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen? But then after that, no, Madonna comes in with like, it sounds like high heels, like hitting the ground. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, here we go.
It's all the Scorpions are on high heels. That's why.
Oh yes.
Do you know what? I will agree with you. I think the song doesn't suit what they tried to do with that opening sequence. It really doesn't. But for me, I'm sorry, the worst Bond song, the one that I really dislike the most, is the Alicia Keys and Jack White from Quantum of
okay.
It should have been the Amy Winehouse song, but yeah, unfortunately not. But like, I don't think it's that bad. It's got a nice little vibe to it.
Do you know what? I'm just being, at the time I was like, I hate this song. But I'm kind of like watching it again this morning. It's like maybe like 8:30, kind of still thinking about Elliot Carver and fake news. But I was like, it's not as terrible. Again, to caveat that, it doesn't match what they tried to do. And what they were trying to do, which I don't think they'd ever done before, with having the Bond opening titles, the musical sequence, trying to tell a part of the story. I don't think they've ever done that before, other than kind of girls jumping up and down naked on trampolines, really, or just gun bullets going across the screen. That's what I mean. And I think the song itself isn't as terrible as I remember. I still think, for me, the Quantum of Solace. What is it? Die Another Day. Had it just been
Another Day
Alicia.
Today.
Had it just been Alicia Keys singing, I'd have been Alicia Keys singing and Jack White, doing the guitar. I'd have probably loved it. I just think it's overproduced. That's me. That's a discussion.
Talking of bullets, though, I think if you were looking for a warning sign with the film, it's within the first 3 seconds when that bullet comes out of the gun and goes into the screen. That is a shocking moment on the gun barrel sequence. Oh dear.
We'll agree. It's not a very good film, and that's not even getting to that awkward CGI paragliding kind of weird sequence that just looks so out of place. Even Pierce didn't like it. I mean, he was the one that wanted to go back to basics, and they did. They just did it without him with Casino Royale. I just think how much money they spent. I don't know. Did any of you listen to Simon Brew's podcast? He kind of discussed kind of Die Another Day in detail and talked about it and kind of the amount of money they spent just on the Ice Palace scenes. And let's not talk about the Aston Martin. Again, weird thing, the Aston Martin vanish. It's the least of that film's problems. It's not a very good gadget. It's a stupid gadget and it's boring. But it's, again, in the grand scheme of things, it's the least of that film's.
If I want to be positive about the film, I mean, I actually don't think it's too bad. Like, it's a bit all over the place. Until they get to about Iceland, it's not too bad. There's like interesting. I found it really interesting at the time that like they went, this is going to be a Bond that's tortured, going to be useless, has to build back up. I found that quite interesting, relatively speaking, for the franchise at the time. And I will say one thing that I think goes really well in the film's favor. Think of this at like the time. You've got 2002. You've just had like the second Star Wars prequel not long come out. I found the sword fight terribly more interesting in Die Another Day than I did in any of the sort of Star Wars prequels. Like, I thought that was really interesting. It's just, unfortunately, Pierce Brosnan is aged out by this point. He's just a bit tired. Even sort of the concept of Gustav Graves as this sort of mirror image, we've kind of saw that done a bit better a couple of movies ago. It's just, you look at it and it just feels, the whole franchise feels tired, aged out. And like, it felt relatively fresh in those previous 3 films, but I think the sword sequence stands out quite well. And yeah, it was interesting that they went to North Korea, the Cuban stuff, interesting. I find it hard not to cringe to death though when watching Jinx and Bond flirt over like birds and stuff like that. Like, they come out at night mostly, and I just no. Someone else talk. I can't.
No, it's pretty. I to add what you said, I like the idea of going to Cuba because I don't think had Bond went to Cuba before. I can't think of off the top of my head. I can't think of another outing of Bond in Cuba. I like the idea. It's just the reason he's there, and then we have Jinx, and then it's the nods. It's the nods. It's the callbacks to every other Bond, and they're like hitting you hitting you with a brick to the head every time they do a nod, and they're going, this is wonderfully subtle. It's like, no, you've just hit me with another fucking brick to the head. And the only thing that makes me, and I didn't know this fact until today, maybe any of you might know this fact, but during the erotic lovemaking scene between Halle Berry and Pierce Bond, she choked on a fig. She choked on a fig, and Pierce had to give her the Heimlich halfway through. And you're kind of going, that whole scene is meant to be super tense, and it's a different Bond. It's a Bond. Hey, I'm sorry, Kate, but I mean, as I've went on a 14-month dry spell before, and I definitely didn't act like Pierce did by the end of that. But it's watching that scene, it's just like, at what point did you choke on a fig during this? And it's like, I kind of want to be there. Is there kind of make the end credits, the blooper reel? I just want to see that. But there's just no real chemistry with her and him. But yet, she's a sexy spy. He's a sexy kind of geriatric spy. And it's the stuff with Rosamund Pike. Again, it's watching it again. Okay, it's got one of the few I remember vividly being in to see this at the cinema with my mum, and the sequence where they're kissing, and they're kind of like they're being watched, and then the like it's like I think she says something along on the lines of did they believe us now? And it's like, oh, they left ages ago. I remember vividly, my mother is not of the Me Too or Time's Up generation. She laughed the loudest in the Oma cinema at that sequence. She just was like, oh, Pierce, like you wee twinkly Irish man. She loved it. But no, it's just a mess. And I kind of agree with you, Lee. There's stuff about it I kind of like is in terms of what they were trying to do, but nah, I don't know. Joe, Kate, where are you kind of weighing in here? There's just not enough positives for me.
Well, I like the opening. Like, I think it has a good setup for a Bond, you know.
Even though the whole thing, no, I think isn't the whole thing about kind of hovering over minds, is that not bullshit?
And, you know, that's like, you know, in the grand scheme of what the film does, that's, you know, on the lower scale of believability. You're
It's
like,
my
okay,
small hill I'm prepared to die on, Joe.
Yeah, put it this way, you can believe that rather than a satellite that's going to split North and South Korea with a sunbeam, you know. You know, I can buy that just for a second, you know, in the grand scheme of the whole film. But no, I do like it, and it's a pretty entertaining sequence. And it's basically the setup for it that I like more than anything, the fact that, oh, Bond's captured, you know, what's going to happen from here. And then, you know, just after the credit sequence, you know, the way, you know, Bond and M's relationships changed, you know, she thinks that he's betrayed her.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, oh, where's this going to go? And then
but does she,
kind of goes.
Does she, though, not she think that it's the Americans think that Bond have cracked?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But there's part of her that sort of thinks it as well. But then in the end, she's like, you know what? I've sort of trusted you this much. I'm going to give you like a last chance. And then that's why she lets him go, in a sense. You know, or at least lets him know, it's like, okay, that's your way out. Go on, James. But yeah, I did like that setup. But then, yeah, it's basically, I know, kind of once they get to Cuba, and then you find out that your fella from North Korea is getting this weird surgery done, and he's got diamonds in his face, and then obviously the twist that happens later, you're just going, oh, for frick's sake. And but I agree with Lee. I do think the fencing and the sword fighting sequence, I think that's the highlight of the film. I think
because Madonna's there, that's why.
No, it's when she leaves it, that's when it picks up. Was it like even her small part, you're just going, this is part of your contract to do the Bond theme, isn't it? That you get a small role in it. There's no other explanation why you're here. Because you can act, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, it's whenever they're beginning the fight, like she kind of like pouts it. I was like, I'm not going to be here for a cockfight or some shit like that. And then you're like,
is she from West Belfast, Joe?
She is. Well, I know. She thought, you know, did she not for a while think she was British whenever she married Guy Ritchie?
I think this is during the British Madonna phase.
Yeah, it's the Guy Ritchie era. But no, it's just awful in it. But then, yeah, the film starts going slowly downhill, and then it just takes a nosedive once they're in Iceland.
Can I just say, like, in terms of diversity on screen, my one favorite moment in that fencing sequence is when they're all hell's breaking loose, and the very end of it all, there's just one black actor comes. I think he gives Bond a message. I think he's like the place needed a remodel in any way, and you're like, right, okay, there's your diversity kind of, you know, check. There's that done for this episode. There's it done. It's done and dusted. But I thought that sequence was too cheesy, because the point in Die Another Day that I find myself checking out, and it's something I hate in films. It's like, right, we're going to London. Bond's going back to London. Ugh. What are we going to play? London's calling. And you're just I
forgot about that.
Really? It's like, come on, Bond, of all the franchises that don't need that. It's like, we know he's Britain's #1 agent. We don't need to know that he's going back. Oh, London calling, and you're like, there's a joke about like the stewardess is giving him the drink, and it's like, lucky I asked for it shaken, ha ha ha, and you're like, no, come on, Pierce, you know, you need to go to the old people's home now. You're the old people's 007, kind of just the room somewhere, you and Roger Moore, and just seeing who can kind of out cheese each other. It's just a big cheesy action movie, and it's really guilty of being that Teflon, as I say, the Teflon superhero, what Pierce's Bond turned into, where he's just indestructible. I don't think he really, we get to see him with a great big bushy beard. That's my best Brian Blessed impression. It's not a very good one, but I don't know. He's just, there's a sequence like he dives through icy water with just pretty much just like a top no real kind of heavy gear on. It's like maybe these are
You
just
saw how hairy that big belly was at the start of the film. Like, he'd probably be fine underneath the water.
No, not Al Pierce. You know, that all weight's gone. And again, Rosamund Pike, I really, really took a dislike to Rosamund Pike for a long time based on this and her performance in Jack Reacher, where she just does the stupidest thing. I talked about this in this podcast before, where she goes, isn't it, to defendants, the people who've been killed, their children have been killed, and she's like, well, how did that make you feel? How did that make it? And you're like, well, I'm going to kill you now. I mean, you look at where she is now, she's an amazing actress. She's absolutely fantastic. But here, okay, everybody needs a paycheck. Everybody needs to get their big break. And I think I remember her talking, I think on the Girls on Film Pod, where I think she refused. I think they wanted her to model, or they in the casting call it was either naked or it was topless, or I think in just lingerie, and she point blank refused, and she still got the job. But I remember kind of reading she had thought that she had blew her one big chance when she kind of said, "No, why do I need to be standing about in lingerie?" Although weirdly, at the sequence in the plane, that outfit, like who really travels in that outfit where she's just like in this kind of little kind of pajama, is sexy pajama number, showing a bit of midriff, and you're just like, really? Why? Oh, I don't know. It's just not a film I have a lot of love for, and it was sad, watching it again, because you kind of go, you get why completely. The Broccoli's decided that they had to go back and refresh it, but I don't really think, Kate, I've given you an opportunity to really weigh in here with Die Another Day.
I mean, I don't know what to add, really. It's just
go on, tell us you love it.
I think I watched it more than the other ones, just because that was the one that we had on DVD. I just feel like I watched it quite a lot. I don't know why. I really just, there's always something about the Bond villains that you enjoy watching, and this one, he just feels very flat, and I don't sleep, like.
But right, again, another small hill I'm prepared to die. He does sleep. He just happens to have a sleep machine. Yeah. So he does fucking sleep. He does sleep. So don't sit and go on, I never sleep. It's so many hours I waste with my big cheesy green.
It's you only get one shot at life. Why would you waste it on sleep? I mean, I could get on board with that, but.
Do you ever just wish like at one point you could just slap someone, like a Monty Python-esque sketch, and just have someone just come in and slap someone with a great big fish? That's like, that sequence you've exactly talked. It's like, oh, fuck off.
Yeah. Shut up.
Fuck off.
That one uses the friggin' gauntlet to start the laser beam. It's like, global warming, it's a killer. And you're like,
He's awful.
Isn't there another one where he kind of like the kind of rent-a-henchman that he has, and it's like just because it's not built, it's like this is, and he just kind of goes, and you're like, oh. And it's also like the fact that he models himself in 007, someone who he met once. He didn't know, without Rosamund Pike's character, he wouldn't have known who he was, but yet this person has defined, in theory, what he's going to look like when he kind of tries to take over the world. And
I always think by this point of the franchise, I don't know if did you guys ever watch the Peter Serafinowicz show?
No. Oh, but yeah, probably did, yeah.
There's a great thing where they have it's James Bond doing stand up at the Apollo, and it's just he is an utter prick, and this film is basically a sketch routine of a James Bond. I will send the clip to you guys afterwards. You're just it is just there. It's not a serious film. I remember just being so hyped for this film. I was coming to that age where I was aware of the making of it happening, all the buzz that was coming out, the idea that there was going to be all these callbacks and so on. And it would be this really deep journey. And it starts that way and it just goes so badly off the rails. And even some you see something like Skyfall, a really beautiful tribute to Bond at his 50th anniversary. With this as a 20th movie, some of the references are quite subtle, and then you have ones where he gets given a watch and it's your 20th, I assume. Why? What does the
no? Because you can feel John Cleese turning around and going, isn't that great, audience? His 20th, and you're like, oh. Fuck off, John Cleese. Sorry. It just makes me angry. And you make a really valid point, to drop the ball so badly on, what is seen as the 20th film. You can't, you think of what they did with Skyfall, when it's such kind of, it looks back and it looks forward as well. And they got that so right. But yet they built it up themselves. This is the 20th Bond. It's going to be a key Bond. It's going to be, all the things you said, Lee. And then just to kind of halfway through it, just kind of go to not really know what they had. Like the director, is it Lee Tamagori? Is the director?
Yeah.
He's the director of this. And I know he went on to do the second XXX film, the film that no one remembers. I wasn't a massive fan of the first one, but let alone having I think it's not the second one. That's without Vin Diesel, I think, isn't
Ice
it?
Cube or something.
Yeah, definitely you have to see that in the cinema. But I don't know. And I know I would definitely. I'll put it up in the links along with. I see that Lee has sent us the little YouTube reference. We'll throw that in the notes for this pod. But I will find the link to the Simon Brew podcast where he talks about the making of Die Another Day. And it was problematic. It was a problematic production. There's no getting away from it. And I think when you see the final product, you can see that with something that they didn't really know. And it was kind of reacting to what else is out there. And just not look, because I think around this time we have Bourne, the first Bourne, which is then kind of, well, no, that's where the direction we need to take 007. And I think Lee, you mentioned the fact that I think Pierce was just too old by this point. Sadly, I mean, he went from it's happened to Daniel Craig as well. You go from being the fresh face in your first outing to, you just look like Roger Moore, old Roger Moore by the end of that franchise. I mean, I love Roger Moore. Roger Moore kept Bond alive. Pierce, well, his last two films for me are a little bit problematic. He at least, brought Bond back and played a big part in bringing Bond back. Anything else anyone want to really kind of, before we generally wrap things up and kind of speak very quickly broadly about Pierce's tenure? Anything anybody really wants to say or finally vent or get off their chest about Die Another Day?
Just love how angry you've been at Die Another Day. It's great.
Do you know what another thing that
theme tune though, baffling.
Do you know another thing that, do you know what? I'm just kind of saying, like, in the grand scheme of things that annoy me in that film. I'm not sitting here going, it's a classic. I'm not going to put it on right now and bop out to Die Another Day and kind of going, oh, Sigmund Freud's such a clever line. Oh, it's genius. But it annoys, it's one of the things that annoys me least about the film in the grand scheme of things. Like, things that annoy me even more is like Jinx when she's getting tortured and it's the callback to Goldfinger. It's like, is there anything you want me to say to her? Or what is it? Who sent you? And she's like, your mama. And you're like, oh, come on. Halle Berry, was she an Oscar-winning performer by this point? I think she had won an Academy Award. And you're like, come on, Hal. You must have clearly said to the script writers, like, that's really what you want me to say? Your mama? Like, oh, I don't know. And then, of course, the delight in Pierce's face when it's like, I think you said something about going down together. And you're like, oh, come on, Pierce. You've been let out of the old people's home just once. No, I'm not letting myself going off on a venty ranty rant. I don't like this film very much. I really don't. And as I say, the grand scheme of things, Madonna's song annoys me least about it. Okay. So, Kate, you've clearly enjoyed how angry I've got. Lee, Joe, anything else you want to fire out just very quickly about Die Another Day? Or are you happy to kind of move on to just a very quick general kind of observation of Pierce's tenure?
Happy to move on. I can't believe it's been 20 years plus though, for God, that's crazy.
It was like 26 years ago he brought back with Goldeneye. It's kind of Scary Bickies and then how it all finished back in the 2002. Joe, you happy to move on to just a general rambling, or just do you want to secretly admit that you love Die Another Day?
No, please, let's get away. Well, I will say a little thing about Die Another Day. I must have had some love for it when I seen it in the cinema, because I remember shortly afterwards getting a pirated version of it in DVD. But it was awful. It was one of those ones, people walking in front of the screen and stuff like that. Yeah.
The DVD is good though. It comes with a really good hour and a half documentary all about the making of the film, which I would highly recommend. So well worth kind of checking that out.
Well, unfortunately, the version from Jonesboro Market that I got didn't. So, but I definitely will take your word for it, because I do have the box set where was every film up to Quantum of Solace, but they left the space for Skyfall for whenever it came out in DVD, so you could put it in it. But I don't know. I've never actually gone through the extras in that there, so that's definitely something I should do now.
There you go, and you might have a whole new love for Die Another
Yeah.
Day. You
No.
know. Just on that
No.
very quick note about pirate copies, I always remember, I can't remember what, I think it was Bond-esque note, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me. We got a dodgy copy when we were down at the Caravan in County Down here, and someone had a connection to get dodgy DVDs. But whatever it was, I vividly remember, like, the guy, whoever was holding the camera, must have, like, almost kind of, I don't think it was the professional kind of, we'll bring a tripod in, but he had it, but he kind of, like, got a sense of halfway through the film he was maybe nodding a wee bit, because it was like boom, boom, and I was like, you can see the camera like shake. This is not really good if you're watching this or you're listening to this, the podcast version. It's better on the video when you kind of see it's like the camera stutters a wee bit, and it's like, all right, okay, I'm good now. But that's, yeah, we've all been there. We've all got the good old dodgy pirate DVDs that were such an important part of our youth and a rite of passage for film. So generally, and I'll start with you, Joe. How do you think we'll kind of look back? 4 films. I know Pierce wanted to do more, and we were mentioned before the recording started. He kind of did a 5th one with the PlayStation game that was out. Everything, isn't it? What did you say? It was Everything
or Nothing.
Everything or Nothing.
But that's the name of the documentary as well, I think.
Yeah, I think featuring Alyssa Milano, I think, is in there as a Bond girl of sorts. I vaguely remember it. It wasn't the best games I remember playing, but I did buy it because it was 007. Like I bought the one with Sean Connery coming back, and it was like, oh, it's not very good. But let's not go there. Generally, how do we look back on the 4 films from Pierce's tenure?
In terms of where they sit in the whole franchise, they're very important, because you go from something like Dalton's last tenure where it wasn't really that successful financially, and there were worries like, well, where do we sort of go with here? And like Lee sort of alluded to at the start of the podcast, the Cold War's over, and Bond was so intrinsically linked to it's like, where do we go from here? And then
he can't help Al-Qaeda anymore.
Exactly. The Mujahideen, was kind of out the window. You couldn't do that by then another day, unfortunately. But no, he managed to just, he was entrusted with the role, and he took the reins of it. And what he does with the role, and what he's done with the role that was very clever that I found, is that he encompassed the best aspects of each Bond. He had that charm of Connery, he had the fun sort of elements of Roger Moore, and then he did have the coldness of Dalton, just little tidbits of that, mixed in with his own performance. And I think in the grand scheme of things, you could make an argument that he is the quintessential Bond, in that he, in terms of the film franchise, in terms of everything that's gone before, he's not Lazenby.
He's not Lazenby. He's not quintessential Bond.
Nobody wants to be Lazenby. He's the worst Bond in one of the best films. But he does take all those things. He has love and nods to the past. But I think it's like you said, there's not maybe enough, in the latter stage of his film to look into the future as to where it's going to go. And maybe, even if Die Another Day had been even just a passable Bond film, it was definitely a signal like there definitely needs to be change within this franchise, especially when you look at spy films in terms of where they were going. We had the Bourne films, and then even Mission Impossible was going through a bit of a change as well at the time. After the second one of that kind of was a bit of a disaster.
I think this was out around the time the third one was either just kind of in development, or JJ had come on board, I think, with the Mission Impossible franchise. And you look at the difference that he made with that franchise, without a doubt. But I would agree. I think there's no doubt he brought Bond back, and he brought Bond back to big box office numbers. Bar, I think Die Another Day was the lowest of his. Well, of course it was. That's why they decided to move on and revitalize. But there's. I would agree with everything you're saying, Lee. For you, broadly speaking, where are we looking back at Pierce's tenure? Is he, like as Joe was saying, kind of maybe a quintessential 007?
I think the problem ultimately is just where the film kind of lands and so on. It's Connery and Moore just define so much of Bond, and it's interesting as despite sort of Die Another Day being sort of 2002, he feels very much like it's this 90s Bond era, very carefree, not having the same issues that other people had, and then not being sort of having the same story conventions that, have defined a lot of the kind of Craig era. I just think you kind of look back on it as like, and I'm always one of those people, you have to judge the films of their time, and especially with the Bond films for Brosnan, is like it starts so well, it starts really bold and interesting, and it, the next two are by and large quite conventional, and then Die Another Day is leaping for the future with the use of CGI, and it just betrays what the franchise has always been about. And Bond always seems to make that mistake of like, it will go too far. You have something like Moonraker, you have something like the name's completely gone from my mind, where he goes to Japan.
You Only Live Twice.
You Only Live Twice. Then Die Another Day. Like,
isn't that we've talked, Lee, Joe and I have talked about this in previous podcasts. That's always an awkward watch when you rewatch that one.
Yeah,
the opening lines of, why do Chinese girls taste different? And you're like, oh no, Sean.
Yeah. Oh, and then it becomes Japanese, and it course corrects quite drastically, and they never seem to learn. So yeah, it's such an interesting period of time, but ultimately, I like Pierce Brosnan, and I like a lot of the films, but it just doesn't quite work overall in the grand scheme of things as an overall piece.
Yeah, I would agree. I think you can at least look back on the Brosnan tenure, bar some of the issues with the last one, but at least you can go back and rewatch, bar maybe the hint of chauvinism and his general kind of shagaboutery is bar the better use of a term, that he basically, I'm trying to think, I think that was an issue I had probably looking back at The World Is Not Enough as well. There's a lot of Brosnan shagaboutery in The World Is Not Enough. Like, I think, doesn't he get off with his doctor to kind of get him back in the field?
People Hill. Okay,
Craig's Bond does that as well. I think, doesn't he do that in not Spectre, in Skyfall?
Yeah, definitely Skyfall. Yeah, I think he does.
I think there's aspects of his character that I think Craig, and how involved Craig is on the Bond films now, that I think you're seeing him definitely trying to address to an extent, but they're less problematic, I think, speaking right now. And I always say things like this, and then I get an angry message or an angry email from someone kind of going, how dare you say they aren't problematic? Here's my list of problems. And you're like, okay, but that's just your issues with Die Another Day. We all have those problems, but they are less problematic looking back to some of the Connery Bonds that we look back at now. Even some of the Roger Moore Bonds, to an extent, they're not as problematic as others. But yeah, I would agree. Kate, we are running out of time, so your last kind of thoughts and generally on the tenure of Pierce Brosnan as 007?
Yeah, I think he for me feels like the quintessential Bond. Just all those sort of aspects of bringing in from the other Bonds. I think just at the end of the day, I just enjoy them. They're just fun. I think, despite the kind of writing that gets a bit kind of more sloppy, and there's still these sort of ideas being crammed in the later films, but it's still good fun. Just kind of feels a bit trashy at points. And I think that is just, for me, that's just what I enjoy about James Bond. It just doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think Pierce Brosnan really embodies that.
No, I will say this, Kate, just before we go. The one thing I am disappointed, you promised me a Taffin reference. You promised me you would bring up Taffin. And neither Joe or Lee have brought up Taffin, so maybe you shouldn't be here! But I can't do it justice. It's just that point where you're just like, you're Irish, right? Aren't you, Pierce? Yeah, you're Irish. Yeah.
There's my reference to it for you. Yeah. There's Joe Cornish. There's Adam Buxton. That is like literally just a hand away from me. So there's my Adam and Joe.
Love it. I adore that line. I don't know where it was appropriate.
It's always appropriate. I will also say, just because you mentioned for our viewers, you showed the Adam Buxton book, which has been one of the books, the joys of lockdown. For me, it's definitely Adam Buxton has very quickly got himself in my heroes of lockdown and getting me through. It's an absolute fab book. I would definitely recommend seeking that out. But sadly, no Taffin reference Kate, you know.
Can you just play it at the end of the podcast, please? I mean, it's what, two seconds?
Yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll play out with a little bit of tapping just for Kate, just to keep her happy. So look, that's us out of time on this St. Patrick's Day special, this weird St. Patrick's Day special celebrating that British icon that is 007, but it is our still the tenuous link with Pierce Brosnan. So all that's really left for me to do now is thank you for listening, and more importantly, thanks to our guests. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks, Jim.
And thank you very much, Lee.
My help has consequences.
So that pretty much brings this episode of the podcast to a close. Thank you to all my guests for giving up their time on this slightly longer than usual episode of We Need to Talk About Movies. But we're talking about 007, so I think you'll allow us to indulge yourselves. If this was your first time listening to the pod, hopefully you enjoyed the experience and you'll be back once again to listen to more of the pod. Be sure to subscribe to make sure you never miss a single episode, and you might also want to check out our website www.banterflix.com, where you can find the complete back catalogue of all our previous episodes of We Need to Talk About Movies. That's enough from me. I've been your host, Jim McLean, the editor-in-chief of the Banterflix Movie Review website. We'll be back with another episode of We Need to Talk About Movies pretty soon, but for now, let's leave the final words on this week's episode to Pierce himself.
What goes on in this town is none of your business.
As long as I'm living here, it is.
Then maybe you shouldn't be living here!
This has been We Need to Talk About Movies. Thanks for listening. For more information, visit banterflix.com. See you next time.